rights are very, very narrow. They're sophisticated in many points. I agree with Jeff. Some we usually underestimate our own ruling classes. But I mean, I'm giving the very strong, I'm giving some very strong emphasis on this in order to try to, for everybody to understand what is the economic background of this. Of course, in order to have the population obey the ruling class and be ready for the sort of exploitation that is going to be needed to carry them forward in all this during this declining economic period, or a very difficult economic period. They need to make people submissive, and they need to cut our rights, and they need to cut our civil liberties, and sometimes going as far as attempting against the most fundamental human rights, as I try to exemplify with this so-called war against crime. And these are pretexts, just like Jeff mentioned on the case of Iraq and the weapons of weapons of mass destruction, and all this talk about the links between Al Qaeda and Saddam Hussein and all that, which incredibly, I mean, they haven't even made a small apology for that. And it's the same with this. It's the same with this. These are big catchwords in order to launch huge campaigns so that people will put up with what these ruling classes need. In the case of Mexico, their problems have already begun to appear during the first part of the last decade. That is, from 2000 to 2006. There was a semi-insurrection in the state of Oaxaca, a very severe one. I can't go into details on that. And obviously, they had the electoral problem after the 2006 elections, which were won by fraud by the person who calls himself the Mexican president today. They had to put a lid on the whole of society. And as I said, the war on these drug lords was the perfect pretext. They do have problems with controlling that sort of violence. There is no doubt about that. Foreign investment in Mexico is dropping to more than worrisome levels, because investors do not find the country very hospitable or a very good place to invest and carry out business. So they resorted to
1 minute.
I'm sorry?
1 minute.
Yeah, I don't need much more time. This is the background. Now, number two. I want to say that the news is not all bad. There have been successful fights against this inroads. I will just get two examples. The first example is a very popular radio talk person, radio talk woman who's very courageous and has done some of the most interesting revelations in the public media in Mexico, was separated from her job a couple of months ago. The public outrage forced the government, who was behind the firing of this person, to step back, and she has now her job back. The second one, and I hope you find this doubly encouraging. 2 weeks ago, our comrades were involved in a fight against the privatization of a public park and sport resource center in the north of Mexico City. The Mexico City government was selling it to a private TV company, one of the big monopolies, in order to build a place to put out their shows. And there was resistance by the traditional population in this northern part, and the Mexico City police repressed carried out a repression of these mobilizations because it's very important for the current governor of the federal district to carry out these privatizations. One of her comrades was involved there. He was taken to jail. He was beaten up, fortunately not very badly. He was, as a matter of fact, two of her comrades were beaten. One of them was taken to jail. To the Mexico City's government surprise, the outrage came very immediately. Also, our comrades did a wonderful job in the defense of this comrade, and there was a mobilization that same evening in these northern districts of Mexico City. People came out in a night's demonstration. The next day they were released, and of course these public this privatization has been put on hold. So the battle has not been won, but I mean there was outrage, there was mobilization, and of course there was an immediate response. Mexico City is different, though, from many other parts of the country where, unfortunately, the population has been much more submissive. But these very encouraging news, of course, mean that we can fight back and that we can win.
I've done a certain amount of reading, and I've read Politics by Aristotle, and Aristotle defines the different types of government. There's a democracy, there's autocracy, there's aristocracy, and there's plutocracy. And basically, Athens had very unusual form of democracy which only encompassed 20% of the population because 80% of the people living in Athens were slaves. However, it was reasonably democratic for the 20% at the top of the pile. Now, if one wants to take our present governing systems in the West, if you want to call it that, and make a comparison historically, you would have to make a comparison with places like Venice and the Netherlands, which were both plutocracies. They were ruled by the traders and merchants of those two places. In 1693, England went over from having something which was very close to a feudal country, and they changed it so that they had a Bank of England and they had a national debt. And the national debt was the important thing because it allowed people on the upper crust, the gentry, to own shares in the government. These shares were bonds, and if the bonds seemed to be operating reasonably well, then they would have confidence because they'd have a budget every year to decide how their economy was behaving. If the one party, the Conservatives or Tories, were in power, they would try to crush people and handle them rather roughly.
30 seconds.
Well, what it really comes down to is we have not got a democracy in this country. We never have had. We have a plutocracy. It's about time we had a democracy. The closest that we've had to democracies in this world have been in socialist countries, and that is what we should be aiming at. And it's time that we did achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. John Wilson?
Yeah, I wanted to raise an issue which I think is very important for in the area of civil liberties within Canada, and that's the rights of the Quebec Nation to self-determination. So I'd like to read the resolution from the NDP Socialist Caucus concerning the Clarity Act. Whereas the Liberal government's Federal Clarity Act, which arrogates to Parliament the unilateral right to determine, after the fact, whether a future referendum vote for Quebec sovereignty has a sufficient majority and a sufficiently clear question, and thus constitutes a gross violation of Quebec's national right to self-determination. Therefore, be it resolved that the NDP actively campaign for repeal of the Clarity Act. Now, I think this takes on, this has always been considered an important issue by the caucus, but it takes on increased urgency now because of the upsurge in support for the NDP, the fact that it now constitutes the official opposition, and that more than half the caucus comes from Quebec. So I think it's quite important that everyone here who is a member of the NDP, with the federal convention of the NDP coming up, make sure that as many riding associations as possible, who are holding meetings relatively soon on this issue, on resolutions, make sure that as many of these riding associations as possible pass this resolution so we have a good chance to get it on the floor of the convention in Vancouver.
Here, here. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, brother right here.
Well, the question is that whether it is possible to have civil liberty or rights under the capitalist system we are living in. Obviously, the answer from me is no. Fundamentally, it is a contradiction to expect this to happen. If you look back to the system that ran, we have two spheres of society. One is a political society and a civil society who has no connection with the political society, which was confirmed by Aristotle, which was confirmed by Hegel, and they championed it. The common people has no business running the government. It is the property owner who runs it. To put added into, to smoothen out, subsequently French and particularly US, they tried to develop the civil liberty theme and ideas and rights of people. Those are entrenched in some kind of rights statement and other things. But if you look at this, right, liberty, what it means, liberty that is given. Liberty, it actually is in a very individual liberty. It has nothing to do with people living in as a social being. This is a very important point. The thing that is, and what does it mean? You have right to do everything as long as you don't interfere with the other's right or harm others. So you're pegged, you're boxed into doing virtually nothing.